Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. The veteran detectives admitted they had never seen anything so brutal. Anastasia Kamlovskaya was born in 1996 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her childhood was spent in a tiny room in the suburbs, where having her own bed was a luxury. For the first 12 years of her life, she had to share the only bed with her mother, Alina, simply because there was no other choice. Her father abandoned the family right after Anastasia was born. An alcoholic who never returned to visit his child or sent any money for support, Alina had to work 2 jobs. But no matter how hard she tried, it was barely enough to get by. In that cramped space, Anastasia grew up without knowing what privacy meant. She never had a small corner to retreat to, never had anything that was completely her own. Those years carved deep, unfading marks into her soul. Then came 2008. Anastasia was 12 years old. Her mother, Alina, decided to send her to live with her paternal grandmother in Kalpino, a small, unfamiliar town. For Anastasia, this was a crucial turning point. For the first time in her life, she had a bed that was hers alone, a room of her own, a space she could call mine. Alina initially promised she would visit her daughter on weekends, but those visits became increasingly infrequent. Alina's life had found a new man, a new beginning, and in that picture of happiness, Anastasia became a piece that didn't fit. The child support payments continued to arrive regularly, but mother-daughter affection that had grown cold long ago. In loneliness and pain, Anastasia found an escape through painting. Her artwork was deeply melancholic, like the silent cry of a soul struggling to surface. Fortunately, her grandmother understood this. The elderly woman not only supported, but quietly nurtured her granddaughter's creative abilities. At age 15, Anastasia began talking about wanting tattoos and piercings. Instead of stopping her like most grandmothers would, her grandmother simply asked, "Would it make you happy?" When she heard the answer was yes from her granddaughter, she not only provided the money, but personally took her to the tattoo parlor. From that moment, Anastasia felt liberated. She began designing her own tattoos, immersing herself in the world of K-pop and anime, comic conventions, cosplay competitions. Gradually, she became the standout girl everyone noticed, some admiring, others envious. While still sitting in school, Anastasia bought her first tattoo machine. She started tattooing herself, then her friends. This wasn't typical teenage behavior. This was raw artistic talent combined with a burning desire for self-expression. At 16, when Anastasia created her social media account, something magical happened. Her vibrant personality, artistic talent, and unique style quickly attracted attention. She wasn't just a pretty face, she was a storyteller, sharing thoughts, passions, and dreams in ways that made thousands of people feel understood. Anime fans, body art enthusiasts, the cosplay community, all found something familiar in her journey and passions. Without knowing it, Anastasia had transcended being an ordinary social media user. She had become an influencer with a powerful voice and a loyal fan base. By age 19, this rising internet star had saved enough money to return to St. Petersburg, rent her own apartment, and work at a prestigious tattoo studio under the artistic name Grishman. She began drawing up bigger plans like appearing on television, collaborating with major brands, and everything a star could dream of. While Anastasia was building her reputation in St. Petersburg, in another city, a young man was struggling with his own issues. Dmitry Chertyshev, born February 15, 1998, in Elmsk. His childhood began with loss when his mother died while he was young, leaving only faint memories and a father who hastily remarried. The stepmother treated Dmitry as if he were an obstacle, cold, distant, as if wanting to erase his existence. Lacking love and affection, Dmitry grew up to become a withdrawn, shy, and quiet boy. Like many others, he found an escape through art, first drawing, then poetry. But what was concerning was how he expressed himself on social media. Dmitry's posts became increasingly strange. He openly wrote about wandering through cemeteries, gazing at portrait photos of young girls on tombstones, and imagining their short lives. Despite being in a serious relationship with his high school girlfriend, Margarita, he frequently shared detailed descriptions of his ideal partner, not just personality traits, but specific physical features and age. In 2017, Dmitry decided to move to St. Petersburg. Margarita, his devoted girlfriend, was the one who arranged everything. She bought tickets, found housing, and organized their new life together. She trusted him completely and was ready to support all his decisions without question. To make ends meet, they began taking web design orders. But then one day, Dmitry came up with another idea, producing adult content. He pulled Margarita into the project, taking on the role of producer and actor, while she became his on-camera partner. The work brought in decent income, but there was one notable detail. Dmitry kept almost all the money for himself. By 2020, he had bought a Mercedes-Benz, which he didn't hesitate to show off on social media. Meanwhile, Margarita seemed unbothered by being financially controlled. She still trusted him completely, letting him lead everything, a textbook example of classic manipulation. Then fate intervened in the most ironic and cruel way. During a visit to Anastasia's studio for a tattoo, Margarita was immediately captivated by the young artist's technique and unique style. So when Dmitry expressed wanting a new tattoo, Margarita didn't hesitate to recommend Anastasia, whom she called one of the most skilled in the industry. From their first meeting, a spark ignited between Dmitry and Anastasia that was hard to hide. As the needle began moving across his skin, both quickly realized they had too much in difficult childhoods. Restless artistic souls, passion for tattoos, anime, and cars. But above all, they shared a fierce desire to achieve fame at any cost. Professional work sessions quickly turned into intimate conversations, then into dates at car shows and anime conventions, places where they could be themselves away from prying eyes. Before long, they fell into a passionate affair, full of intensity but also full of risk. They tried to hide everything, but when you're involved in a 5-year relationship with a woman who trusts you blindly, secrets sooner or later will be exposed. Margarita didn't take long to realize the truth laid bare before her eyes. The woman who had once trusted enough to introduce her boyfriend to Anastasia now could only helplessly watch her 5-year relationship crumble piece by piece. Initially, she tried to stay calm, to handle everything maturely, through conversations, discussions, efforts to salvage and find common ground. But Dmitry's response was only evasive, vague, and insincere words. He promised to end things with Anastasia, then secretly continued the relationship behind Margarita's back, as if promises were just tools to delay everything. When conversations turned into confrontations, when trust was replaced by jealousy, when love had no place left, Dmitry made his choice. And sadly, he didn't choose Margarita. What truly became the deepest knife to Margarita's heart was this. Dmitry had bought Anastasia an expensive car, something he had never done for Margarita, even once in their 5 years together. This was no longer simply an affair. This was an act of completely erasing everything they had built together, from feelings and trust to personal sacrifice. In a moment of complete collapse, Margarita allegedly damaged the car and even threatened to harm herself. But even that wasn't enough to make Dmitry stay. She had left her hometown for him, entered a controversial industry under his influence, supported him financially, emotionally, and professionally. And this was what she received in return. Dmitry left the apartment that had been their shared home with Margarita and moved in with Anastasia. By this time, Anastasia had become a prominent name on social media with hundreds of thousands of followers. And Dmitry, he was about to get what he had pursued his entire life, fame. He became his new girlfriend's manager, responsible for building her media image, producing content, and even running the online courses that generated steady income. Their business exploded. Followers continued to grow. But for Dmitry, it still wasn't enough. The ambition within him remained unsatisfied. It didn't take long for Dmitry to convince Anastasia to become his partner in producing adult content. He painted a glittering picture of fame, money, and a special position in the online world. But remember, this wasn't new. He had exactly the same with Margarita. The same promises, the same old manipulation tactics. Anastasia quickly agreed, and her career took a completely different path. Dmitry called her his muse, gave her expensive gifts, appeared beside her as a loving and successful partner. But the reality was, Anastasia was the one who had to pay the price with her image, reputation, and mental health. She was the spokesperson, the soul of the brand, the real asset. And Dmitry, he just sat behind the scenes counting profits. This change didn't happen in silence. In early 2022, Anastasia was invited to appear on the television talk show Beyond the Line, to share about her life and career journey. She agreed, thinking it would be positive promotional opportunity for herself. But she had no idea she was walking into a meticulously orchestrated psychological ambush. Right at the studio, the production team had invited her mother, Alina, to appear as a surprise. In the suffocating atmosphere of lights and millions of viewers watching through screens, Alina choked up saying her daughter wasn't raised to become like this. Then blamed Dmitri directly for everything that had happened. The incident immediately became a media storm, and from there, the glamorous mask began to crack. When Anastasia stepped onto the stage, she immediately defended herself and the boyfriend who was being harshly criticized. Before millions of viewers watching the show, she declared that making adult films was her long-held dream, even calling it a form of modern art. She didn't hesitate to mock the moral preaching about living properly, considering it merely outdated stereotypes imposed on women. But then, the show dropped the real bomb. Margarita, the ex-girlfriend who had stood by Dmitri for 5 years, suddenly appeared as a guest. With a calm but suppressed voice, she described Dmitri as someone with tendencies to manipulate and attack both emotionally and physically with his partners. She didn't speak loudly, but every word was like a knife blade. Margarita implied that what Dmitri truly cared about wasn't Anastasia, but the fame she could bring him. When the host turned to Alina, Anastasia's mother, and asked whether she was worried about her daughter living with someone who had been accused of abuse, Alina just shook her head slightly. She said softly, "Dmitri seems very quiet. I don't think he's capable of harming anyone." That statement seemed harmless, but in this context, it would become a deadly denial. Just a few months after the talk show where Anastasia had fiercely defended Dmitri, their relationship began to crack beyond repair. Dmitri, who had now completely abandoned his work in the tech industry, gradually became dependent on Anastasia's income. He began pushing her to appear more frequently in pornographic content. No longer art, no longer choice, but financial obligation. Anastasia felt trapped. She not only wanted to end the relationship, but also wanted to leave the country to start over. After months of saving, she seriously planned to emigrate to South Korea, where she dreamed of opening a tattoo studio. Free and independent. She shared this plan with some close friends, began gradually selling her belongings, and cleaning up her old life, as if removing each layer of chains. At the end of July 2022, Anastasia finally convinced Dmitri to leave her apartment. Those close to her believed she was so determined because someone new had entered her life. A blogger, a famous influencer named Carol Kittleson. On July 31st, Anastasia met Carol. They spent an afternoon walking through the familiar streets of St. Petersburg, talking about everything, laughing freely. For the first time in months, Anastasia's eyes sparkled with genuine happiness. Not the fake happiness of social media, but radiance from deep within her soul. Relief. Freedom. Something in her eyes resembled someone who had just seen herself again. But just hours after parting ways, Carol received a cold and unexpected message. Anastasia said it would be the last time they met, and she didn't want to continue any contact. Carol was stunned. He immediately called once, twice, then continuously in desperation. But there was only the sound of ringing in the void, no one answering. The gentle and warm woman, who had just smiled brightly beside him, now seemed to have vanished into thin air. Something had happened, and the change was so sudden, it was terrifying. From that fateful night, a completely different Anastasia appeared, or more accurately, disappeared from the real world. She cut all ties with normal life, refusing to meet friends, avoiding scheduled appointments, and never answering when anyone called. Instead, she only replied to messages with short, cold responses like, "Ice, I need quiet," or "I need time to process everything." Although she continued posting on social media, sometimes sharing quiet status updates about her personal journey, she no longer live-streamed, no longer appeared with her real face. Her mother and closest friends were the first to sense something was wrong. They knew Anastasia too well. She was someone who could never stay silent for so long, never refuse calls from loved ones. Essentially, Anastasia had completely disappeared from the real world, leaving only a digital ghost that continued operating mechanically. On August 2nd, fate arranged a chance encounter that would reveal the truth. A close friend of Anastasia was attending a friend gathering when she suddenly saw Dmitri there. Worried about Anastasia, she decided to ask about her. His response left her horrified. "My former partner asked me to help her go far away," Dmitri said with a terrifyingly casual tone, and I did as she asked. It wasn't the words, but the way he said them. Cold, comfortable, as if discussing weekend plans. In his eyes, there was no sadness, no worry, only a strange satisfaction, as if he had just completed a difficult task. When she tried to ask more, he refused to elaborate, but that friend knew something terrible had happened. The next 7 days were 7 days of hell for that friend. She knew something was wrong, but how could she prove it? Anastasia was still texting, still posting. Family was still receiving messages from her. But all interactions felt mechanical, missing the warmth, missing the soul that Anastasia once had. Finally, unable to bear this uncertainty any longer, on August 9th, she called the police and told them everything she knew. Police arrived at Anastasia's apartment that same afternoon. They knocked, but no one answered. They called out, only echoes from the empty hallway. A terrifying feeling enveloped the space as they realized the frightening silence. Finally, with no other choice, they broke down the door and entered. The room was like the scene of a shattered dream. Half-packed suitcases lay scattered across the floor. Airline tickets to South Korea were still on the table, next to a passport and documents for a new life. The bed was soaked with dark stains that had dried and hardened, telling the story of final moments filled with horror. And in the bathroom, they found Anastasia's body. She lay there with her entire future ahead of her. But now, she was just a cold corpse, having begun to decompose after more than a week. The autopsy report later confirmed Anastasia had died from multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck. Deep, brutal wounds that showed someone didn't just want to kill her, but wanted her to endure ultimate pain before dying. The crime scene told the story of a dream about to become reality that was suddenly cut short. Anastasia was in the process of packing for her journey to Seoul. Suitcases opened wide with carefully arranged clothes, meticulously prepared immigration documents, even business plans for her dream tattoo studio. Everything pointed to a woman who was ready to start a new chapter of her life, escaping the toxic relationship that had suffocated her for too long. Freedom was right before her eyes, just a few more days away. After discovering Anastasia was dead, Dmitry immediately became the prime suspect and was arrested the next day. From the first minute in the interrogation room, he began a sophisticated and terrifying web of lies. His story, a confused mess of self-defense, accident, mercy-killing, and assisted suicide, each version contradicting the previous one, each retelling revealing more clearly the deceitful nature of the entire story. According to Dmitry's initial statement, after Anastasia's date with Kirill on the night of July 31st, she came home and he appeared shortly after. When he saw the half-packed suitcases, when he saw the airline tickets and immigration documents prepared and ready, he realized she truly intended to leave him and start a new life. Perhaps she had told him about Kirill, about the new love she had found, about the final hope to escape his control. According to him, they had a fierce argument. She told him she had had enough, that she wanted freedom, that she would never return to him, and in blind rage. At least that's what he claimed. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed Anastasia repeatedly. Then he said he ran away in shock, panicked, then came back to save Anastasia, but discovered she was already dead. So he decided to move her body to the bathtub and leave it there. But this was just the beginning of his cruel cover-up plan. While Anastasia's body lay in the bathroom, Dmitry completely took over her social media life, responding to messages from family and friends, posting on social media, maintaining the perfect illusion that she was still alive and preparing for her trip to South Korea. However, when lawyers advised and helped Dmitry build his legal strategy, his story changed completely once again, this time in a more calculated and frightening direction. He completely abandoned his previous statements about self-defense or accident, instead transforming himself into a reluctant hero. According to this new version, Anastasia had fallen into severe depression, so desperate that she begged him to free her from the pain. He claimed he was only fulfilling his lover's final request, an act born of compassion, not cruelty. But truth has a way of exposing even the most sophisticated lies during the crime scene reconstruction. When investigators asked Dmitry to describe the final moments in detail, he accidentally let slip a detail that completely destroyed his entire story. When asked about Anastasia's final words, he admitted, with a confused look when he realized his mistake, that she had begged him to call for help. If someone wanted to die, why would they beg to be saved? This confession was like a bomb, completely exposing the deceitful nature of all previous stories and proving that Anastasia had fought for her life until the very last moment. But what Dmitry did after murdering Anastasia truly revealed his frightening cruelty and calculation. Throughout the following months, he turned hiding his crime into a dark art. He regularly returned to the apartment, not out of guilt or remorse, but to maintain a perfect performance. He taped over every crack and air vent to prevent the smell of decomposition from spreading to the hallway. Sprayed perfume on Anastasia's body to mask the increasingly heavy stench of decay. This wasn't the behavior of someone being tormented by guilt. These were the cold, calculated actions of someone who only cared about protecting himself. Meanwhile, he had completely taken over Anastasia's social media life with frightening accuracy. He used her phone to respond to messages from family and friends, posted old photos from her gallery with captions that perfectly matched her style, even used her bank cards to pay rent and make daily purchases. For months, he maintained the perfect illusion that Anastasia was still living a normal life. On January 22nd, Dmitri finally pleaded guilty to murder, but still clung to his fabricated story about Anastasia begging to be freed. Judges, lawyers, and the victim's family all had to witness him transform brutal murder into a story about compassion and love. The trial dragged on with contradictory testimonies and final attempts to escape consequences. By January 2024, the final verdict was announced. 8 years in prison. Only 8 years for planning and executing murder. 8 years for manipulating her family and friends for months. 8 years for stealing. Not her life, but her final chance at happiness and freedom when Seoul was right before her eyes. But Anastasia's pain didn't end with death. In one final heartbreaking detail, her mother Alina allowed media film crews to film at her daughter's funeral for a fee. Even in death, Anastasia was still turned into a source of income, still exploited by the very person who should have protected her most. Her paternal grandmother, who had truly loved and nurtured Anastasia since she was 12 years old, publicly and harshly criticized Alina. She couldn't understand how a mother could turn her child's funeral into a business opportunity. Even after death, Anastasia couldn't escape being exploited. Story 2. A plastic bag on the roadside. A sanitation worker thought he had just found a free dinner. But when he washed the pieces of meat under the faucet, what he discovered sent screams piercing through the winter night of 1996. That was only the beginning of the nightmare. Within days, Nanjing police had found over 2,000 pieces of a 20-year-old college student's remains scattered throughout the city, like clues in a cruel game. The case would become an obsession for nearly 3 decades. This is the story of Tao Ai King, a case that has haunted an entire nation. Winter in Nanjing was bitterly cold. The northeast wind whistled through every street, penetrating even the thickest coats, while most residents huddled around steaming hot pot dinners at home. Somewhere out there, people still worked silently in the harsh cold to make a living. Through the white fog and empty streets, a sanitation worker continued his tireless work. His job was to clean the sidewalks, scrape thick snow to prevent ice formation, and collect trash before it piled up, while working diligently in the freezing morning. He suddenly noticed something unusual, a bag lying alone on Waikyo Road in the Shinwaku area. It lay there so oddly and unexpectedly that he had to stop. Driven by curiosity, he gently opened the bag. Inside were neatly cut pieces of meat, uniform in size, apparently pre-processed. The color was fresh, perfectly cooked, and looked quite appetizing. He assumed it was good pork, perhaps dropped accidentally by someone returning from the market. For him, a sanitation worker in the freezing winter, this was like an unexpected gift from heaven. Without hesitation, he decided to take the bag of meat home, already imagining a hot, rich meat soup that would chase away the bone-chilling cold of Nanjing's winter night. After a long day of hard work outdoors, what could be better than a warm meal with the aroma of savory soup and laughter filtering through frost-covered windows? Being meticulous by nature, he didn't forget to thoroughly wash each piece of meat under the faucet, carefully removing any dust or dirt that might have stuck. His cautious work habits always put food safety first, even with a gift found on the street. But then, while casually reaching into the bag for another piece of meat, his finger touched something strange. It was long, soft, but firmer than regular meat. His instincts warned him something was wrong, so he pulled the object out of the bag. And then his world collapsed before his eyes. It was a human finger. He stood frozen, staring blankly at the horrifying object in his hand. Part of him still tried to deny it, hoping it was just dim lighting causing him to see wrong. But then, as if compelled by strange instinct, he bent down to look back into the bag. At that moment, the truth was even more cruel. Not just one, but 3 human fingers were mixed in with the meat he had planned to cook for his family. His horrified scream tore through the cold night. A terrifying thought struck him. If these were really human fingers, what were those pieces of pork? His hands trembling, he frantically dialed the police. When they received the call, the police officers were initially skeptical. They thought it might just be a night shift worker who was too tired, imagining things after an exhausting and freezing day. But when he brought the bag to the station, the atmosphere immediately changed. Tension filled the room as they saw with their own eyes what was wrapped in plastic. Who would throw away such a large amount of meat on the roadside? And when human fingers were revealed before their eyes, all doubt vanished instantly. The bag was sent for examination. After several hours, the forensic results that were announced left the entire police station silent. This wasn't ordinary meat. This was human remains. Immediately, a large-scale manhunt was deployed throughout Nanjing. Police divided into multiple teams, urgently searching every street and alley, leaving no clue unexplored that might lead to the victim's identity or trace the perpetrator. However, what they discovered next was even more horrifying than imagined. One by one, at 8 different locations around Nanjing University, police discovered plastic bags containing the remaining parts of the body. From the stadium near the main gate, to the hospital campus, to remote sidewalks, traces of the victim were scattered everywhere, as if the killer had deliberately arranged each location to challenge the investigation team. The next day, an even more disturbing discovery was recorded: a bag containing cooked meat parts, and inside it was a human head. 10 days later, the victim's clothing was also found, extinguishing any faint hope that this was just an accident or misunderstanding. At that time, DNA testing technology was not yet widespread, so identifying the remains couldn't be done through modern methods. However, through muscle tissue analysis, hair samples, and clothing characteristics, forensic experts determined that the victim was a young woman. Then police began contacting families with missing relatives, meticulously cross-referencing every small detail. And then from the dark veil and scattered remains, the tragic picture gradually became clear. The victim was identified as Tao Iking. So who is Tao Iking? And why did a young woman have to endure such a brutal death? Her body dismembered into thousands of pieces, some of which were cooked like ordinary meat. Ikwin was born in March 1976 in Taizhou City, Jiangsu Province. She was the youngest in a family with 2 sisters, and according to her older sister Tao Ai Hua, their childhood was a long series of hardships, poverty, and silent endurance. The family lived in persistent poverty, and every winter was a harsh trial. The 2 sisters had only one coat to share between them, and naturally as the younger one, Iking always had to use her sister's hand-me-downs shirts with worn shoulders or patched shoes. While other children their age played carefree, buying candy at the school gate, the Tao sisters could only watch from afar, silently counting every penny their parents had scraped together. After saving for a whole week, they might have enough to buy one small candy. Finally, Tao Ai Hua, the older sister, chose to sacrifice her own future. She quietly dropped out of school, accepting any job that could earn money, all with one single goal: to earn enough money to send her younger sister to continue school. Iking understood the burden her sister was carrying. She felt every hard-earned dollar her sister sent home, understanding that silent sacrifice through each piece of old clothing, each package of food sent from home. More than once, she had suggested dropping out to work and help, but Ai Hua always firmly refused. Just keep studying. Study to have a good future. A future we've never dared to dream of. That was the familiar phrase Ai Hua often told her sister. And Ai Qing didn't disappoint those expectations. She studied tirelessly. Finally, she was accepted to Nanjing University, majoring in computer applications in the information management department. In October 1995, she set foot in Nanjing with an excited heart, carrying dreams of escaping the vicious cycle of poverty, and above all, carrying her family's hopes. Although the family was poor and couldn't buy her a computer or expensive study materials, they always tried to maintain a peaceful space for her studies, to the extent that when her grandfather passed away, or even on the day Ai Hua got married, they kept the news secret because they wanted Ai Qing to focus and live a better life than they had. Ai Qing was always someone who lived quietly, but with great effort. In her friends' eyes, she was an introverted, quiet, and simple student. She often wore the same few old outfits, never paying attention to her appearance like many other female students. However, she always radiated neatness, cleanliness, and a progressive spirit that made people easily sense the seriousness in her every action. She didn't like noise and rarely appeared in crowded places. Nevertheless, Aiken wasn't completely isolated. She still had a small group of close, trusted friends to share academic pressures with, occasionally going out together to chat and relieve stress after class. Even after going to the city for university, she always stayed in touch with old friends from home. On January 7, 1996, she took time to visit home, meeting old friends for dinner and reminiscing about high school memories. It was a warm and pleasant evening. The next day, she returned to Nanjing to continue the new semester. Everything proceeded normally until the afternoon of January 10th, around 5 p.m., when Aiken was last seen leaving the Gulu campus. Classmates still clearly remember that moment. They saw her walk outside, carrying her backpack, her small figure blending into the crowd on the street, and they also remember that from that moment on, she never returned. Before leaving that afternoon, a small but tense incident had occurred. Aiken's roommate had accidentally used a hot plate right in the dormitory, a strictly prohibited act according to school regulations. When discovered, the dormitory supervisor required both students in the room to share responsibility. Regardless of who actually violated the rules, Aiken was forced to pay half the fine. She had tried to explain that she wasn't involved in using the hot plate and didn't even know her roommate had done so, but all attempts at explanation were futile. The management maintained their penalty decision. The argument dragged on helplessly, making her feel unjustly treated. Classmates present at that moment still remember her sad, disappointed expression as she walked out of the dormitory building. And that was the last time they saw Aiken alive. Initially, no one thought anything serious had happened. It was exam week, with heavy pressure causing many students to isolate themselves to focus on studying. Aiken was no exception. She had previously disappeared for entire days in the library or quiet study corners when she needed time alone. Moreover, before leaving, she had carefully tidied her bed and organized her bookshelf neatly. Everything suggested she was just going out for a while. Perhaps she just wanted to regain composure or needed to handle something. No one suspected that moment would be the last time anyone saw her. Classmates and her roommate reported her missing, but the dormitory management decided not to notify her family. They didn't want to cause panic. They even kept the news within a small circle of friends and staff. It wasn't until January 19th that everything came to light, more than a week after Aiken was last seen. In the following days, horror continued to spread throughout Nanjing. Police continuously discovered more plastic bags, all containing human body parts that had been chopped into small, bite-sized pieces, processed so meticulously that, at a glance, anyone could easily mistake them for pork bought at the market. These bags were scattered at multiple points throughout the city, but the highest concentration was still around Nanjing University, where the victim had studied. This cruel dismemberment made the autopsy process extremely difficult. Identifying marks were completely erased, requiring the forensics team days to partially recover biological information from the remaining tissue fragments. After comparing muscle structure, analyzing biological indices, and gender characteristics that remained, they reached a heartbreaking conclusion. The victim was a young woman who had just turned 19. The horror didn't stop there. Soon after, more plastic bags were found at other locations, like the Shui's Wagong area or street corners with little foot traffic on the city's outskirts. Each discovery left both the investigation team and residents stunned, because this time, there weren't just processed body parts, but also the victim's clothing, along with the most haunting detail, a cooked human head. When the search ended, a number that shook all of Nanjing was announced. Over 2,000 pieces of AI Qing's remains had been collected by police from 8 different locations, all around Nanjing University campus. Each piece was carefully wrapped in plastic bags, deliberately distributed everywhere, as if the perpetrator wanted to send a message or slow down the process of identifying the victim. But what haunted investigators even more wasn't just the quantity, but the method of body processing. Every cut was extremely precise. No signs of haste, no deviations, no sawtooth edges like amateur tools would leave. Particularly, the cuts around the neck area were astonishingly clean, showing the perpetrator must have had high anatomical skills, possibly a doctor, an advanced medical student, or even someone with experience in surgical procedures. Some body parts, according to forensic examination, had been cooked multiple times over extended periods. This wasn't temporary boiling to hide evidence, but actual cooking processes lasting many days, as if someone was experimenting or had a darker purpose that no one could understand. This made Ai Ching's face unidentifiable and completely obscured the time of death. However, that wasn't the most horrifying part. All major internal organs, heart, liver, spleen, had completely disappeared without a trace. They weren't present in any of the found bags, nor were there signs of destruction. They had been deliberately removed. This disappearance, more than anything else, opened up countless dark theories. Police worked day and night, continuously contacting families with missing relatives to cross-reference information. Finally, thanks to a small detail, a distinctive mole still identifiable on the right cheek, they were able to confirm the victim's identity. When the news was announced to the family, desperate grief struck like lightning. Beloved Ai Ching, the daughter in whom the entire family had placed all their trust and hope, the one for whom they had sacrificed everything to nurture into success, was now gone forever. Not only brutally murdered, her body was also desecrated in the most cruel way. And worse yet, the killer was still free out there, blending into the crowd as if nothing had happened. The senior officer involved in the case investigation bluntly declared, "This is not the work of an amateur. Anyone who did this must have deep knowledge of human body structure." This act was both systematic and extremely brutal. The investigation entered a difficult phase. Following standard procedure, police prioritized investigating those closest to the victim: classmates, professors, and everyone who lived and worked in the university area. Based on crime scene analysis and case characteristics, investigators sketched a psychological profile of the suspect. A single middle-aged man, physically fit, living alone, and most importantly, having access to cooking facilities in a private space. This was a crucial factor because processing the body required extensive time and secluded space. However, after thoroughly screening the entire Nanjing University campus, from professors and staff to workers, they found no one fitting this profile, not a single person. The investigation was then expanded citywide to neighboring districts, hoping to find any clue, however small, that might lead to the truth. But every lead ended in a dead end. You might wonder about security cameras. Surely such a large university must have had adequate surveillance systems. In reality, while that might be true today, in the mid-1990s, surveillance technology was very limited. Security cameras were still a luxury, and most public areas weren't equipped with them. Nevertheless, Nanjing police treated this case with maximum seriousness. They established a special task force, stationed right at Nanjing University, working tirelessly, systematically screening every street corner and alley in the city to find anything that could become evidence. But after 3 months of exhausting all resources without any significant leads, the task force finally had to withdraw. The atmosphere at the university became tense as rumors began spreading. Ai Ching's photo was posted throughout the campus, and every student was required to prove they weren't involved. They had to present clear alibis for the night she disappeared. However, like previous times, the investigation hit another dead end. The killer once again slipped through the hands of justice. When students, professors, and Ai Ching's friends all had solid alibis, police gradually eliminated everyone in her direct social circle. From then on, the investigation direction completely changed. Perhaps this wasn't the act of someone familiar with the victim. It might have been a random attack by a stranger, or worse, the work of a dangerous psychopath still hiding in the city. The media quickly picked up the story, reporting every new development. Police even announced rewards for any information that could lead to the perpetrator's arrest. They publicly released case details, from the type of plastic bags used to wrap the remains, the bag containing the meat pieces, to a patterned bedsheet found during the investigation. All were hoped to be recognized by someone somewhere. But time passed, and despite all announcements, all pleas for help from police, no useful leads came in. January 19, 2016, exactly 20 years after the shocking case at Nanjing University, an article posted on a local WeChat account shook Chinese public opinion once again. The article revealed a chilling truth. According to current legal regulations, this was the final deadline in the 20-year statute of limitations for murder prosecution. In other words, if no one was arrested or indicted by the end of that day, then even if the perpetrator was revealed later, they couldn't be brought to justice, even if they confessed. Even with clear evidence, the law would no longer have the right to punish. The most brutal crime could pass forever, as if it never existed. This news quickly ignited a wave of national outrage. Citizens were furious, journalists spoke out in unison, and the online community continuously called for justice. They demanded an exception, that for such brutal cases, there could be no concept of investigation, exploration. A cold-blooded killer couldn't hide for 2 decades, and then legally escape just because time had passed. The afternoon of the next day, China's Ministry of Public Security officially responded. On their Weibo account, the Criminal Investigation Bureau declared decisively, "No statute of limitations, no forgetting." This commitment was both reassurance and a strong declaration that the case would not be closed, no matter how many more years it took. From that point, legal scholars began heated debates. Should a statute of limitations apply to particularly serious crimes? Some opinions suggested that in exceptional cases, it might still be possible to petition for continued prosecution, even after exceeding the legal deadline. But this depended on legal interpretation, and more importantly, on the determination not to let justice be buried by time. For AI Qing's family, they only yearned for one thing, the truth. In their rare statements to media, they shared that even if the killer came forward to confess today, they would be ready to forgive. They didn't need revenge, didn't need punitive justice, they just wanted to know why. Why did their beloved daughter had to suffer such a cruel fate? They just needed an answer to find peace. Over the years, due to the mysterious and horrifying nature of the case, the story has repeatedly gone viral on social media, each time stirring public opinion with heated discussions, new theories, and spreading fear in the community. Some believe that cooking and dismembering the body was the killer's way of destroying evidence, aimed at creating maximum difficulty for the investigation and erasing any traces that could lead to their true identity. Others think this behavior stemmed from deep personal motives, perhaps an outburst of rage, or some twisted psychological perversion that drove the perpetrator to cause AI Qing's horrific death. During the investigation, the Yangshi Evening Post published AI Qing's photo, showing her with short hair similar to a male style. This image immediately caused panic waves in the community. Many worried that there might be a serial killer lurking, specifically targeting women with short hair. Fear increased when people remembered that AI Qing wore a red coat on the day she disappeared. This made women with short hair frequently wore red, particularly anxious. But there were even darker rumors. The complete disappearance of AI Qing's major internal organs led to theories that she might have become a victim of human organ trafficking. This is one of the most haunting theories, and has persisted for many years. This theory was based on the actual situation of China's organ market. According to research by scholar Su Bowang from 1983, the main source of organs for transplants in China came from executed prisoners. This situation continued until 2015, when the government officially banned using organs from executed persons for transplant purposes. After the 2015 ban, the organ shortage situation, already very serious, became even worse. At the same time, another concerning phenomenon began appearing. The number of mysterious disappearances across the country showed an increasing trend. While there's no hard evidence directly linking AI Qing's death to organ trafficking, the fact that the most important organs in her body disappeared without a trace quickly made this theory one of the most believed by the public. Public interest in the case was also clearly shown through online activities. On March 21, 2007, a user named Zilu Cha posted a detailed description of the case online. Later on May 28, 2008, a group of anonymous users on Baidu Tiba established AI Qing Bar, a specialized forum to collect and discuss all information related to the case. Notably, on June 19th of the same year, another netizen with the nickname Hey Misa posted a shocking analysis titled Thought on the Nanjing dismemberment case. In the post, this person theorized that the killer might have known AI Qing beforehand, possibly even having a secret crush on her. The post immediately went viral and created fierce debates on the internet. Many began questioning the true identity of Hey Misa, whether this person had inside information about the case or even had some personal connection to the incident. Later, on June 24, 2008, the Modern Express in Nanjing reported on a wave causing a stir on Chinese social media, precisely the posts by the user named Himisa. The story quickly attracted police attention, and from then on, Himisa disappeared. The original post was suddenly deleted, further raising suspicions about the identity and true motives of the two cooperate with investigative agencies if requested. They said this user was a 26-year-old man who had studied law and whose father was a police officer. Local police later also confirmed this person had no malicious intent. His posts were mainly speculation and inference based on assumptions, not actual evidence. The forum editor, where the post appeared, also clarified all content had been removed at police request. Not because Hey Misa had any real connection to the case, or because he was trying to hide something. Nevertheless, this person's sudden disappearance without any public explanation still left the online community suspicious. Was this simply someone who liked to theorize, or someone who knew more than he had ever said? In the years following AI Ching's tragedy, Nanjing University made small efforts to show remorse. They refunded all tuition fees the family had paid for her. However, this was still not enough to soothe the family's pain. On March 29, 2021, exactly 25 years after the case, Sister Ai Hua officially filed a lawsuit against Nanjing University and the Gula District People's Court. She demanded compensation of 1.62 million yuan, approximately $246,000, alleging the school had failed to ensure students' safety, especially after penalizing her sister on January 10th and then letting her leave the school alone. Ai Hua argued that the discovery of AI Ching's remains scattered throughout the campus was evidence of the school's weak security system. However, just 1 week later, on April 6th, she suddenly withdrew the lawsuit without giving clear reasons. Until May 2022, a Weibo post caused a public uproar by claiming the Nanjing University case had finally been solved. Rumors spread quickly, with everyone thinking justice had finally been served. But on May 30th, all hopes were shattered. AI Ching's family, Nanjing police, and the Cyberspace Administration all confirmed this was just false rumors. The Nanjing case still had no resolution. The original poster was later fined for spreading false information. Nearly 3 decades have passed. Still no justice, no resolution, only deep wounds carved into the family's memory. Even today, many of Ai Ching's relatives still avoid mentioning her name. They are terrified of reliving the horror of seeing her dismembered remains displayed at the police station, haunting images that will never fade. This case is not just the tragedy of a poor family losing their talented daughter, but also the collective nightmare of an entire city, an entire nation. It raises persistent questions about human nature. Story 3. On the morning of July 7, 2015, police in Binh Phuc Province, Vietnam, received a horrifying report of a massacre that had taken place in a wealthy family's home. At approximately 6:45 a.m. that same day, Mrs. Dan T. Kim Loan, born 1975, a housekeeper for Mr. Le Van Mai's family, 48 years old, residing in Minh Hung Commune, arrived at the house as usual to begin her work. Upon arrival, Mrs. Loan noticed that the back gate of the villa was locked, while the front door was only slightly ajar, highly unusual. Stepping inside, she was horrified to discover 5 bodies scattered throughout the house, including Mr. Mai and his wife, their son, daughter, and granddaughter. Immediately after receiving the report, Binh Phuc Provincial Police quickly cordoned off the crime scene and launched an investigation. The incident occurred at a luxurious villa located along National Highway 13 in Tranquil District, in Phuc Province. The villa's grounds covered nearly 10,800 square feet and served as both the residence of Mr. Mai's family and the headquarters of Kwok and Wood Processing Company, which he owned. Notably, the crime scene was only about 330 feet from the police station, making the incident even more shocking and causing nationwide outrage. When police arrived at the scene, in addition to the 5 bodies discovered inside the villa, they found the body of a 14-year-old boy lying in the yard near the main gate. All victims were found tied up with multiple fatal wounds to their necks, indicating signs of a brutal and premeditated murder. The victims of the massacre included Mr. Lu Van Mai, born 1967, the homeowner and owner of Quackenwood Company, Mrs. Nguyen La, an NGA, born 1972, Mr. Mai's wife, La Tien Lin, born 1993, their eldest daughter, La Quoc, and born 2000, their youngest son, Du T Thursday New, born 1997, Mrs. Na's niece, Du Min Vai, born 2001, Nu's younger brother, and also Mrs. Na's nephew. The siblings Nu and Vi had been living with Mr. Mai's family for a long time. Their mother, Mrs. Na's younger sister, was divorced and frequently worked away from home, so she had left her 2 children with her sister for care. At the blood-soaked crime scene, amid the suffocating tension, a miracle occurred. Mr. Mai's youngest daughter, commonly called Na, who was only 18 months old at the time, had survived. The little girl was found sleeping soundly in her bed. The area around the crime scene quickly descended into chaos. While police maintained strict control over the villa, Hundreds of curious onlookers crowded the area, lining National Highway 13 to follow the developments. Specialized units from the Ministry of Public Security coordinated with Ben Phuc Provincial Police to immediately begin work. They collected all fingerprints, blood traces, and shoe prints left in the villa for testing and analysis. Every small detail was carefully documented in an effort to find clues about who had murdered the entire family. On the afternoon of July 7, 2015, Ben Phuc Provincial Police held an emergency press conference to provide preliminary information about the shocking massacre that killed 6 people from the same family. The news spread rapidly, shocking the entire nation. Police began summoning and taking statements from people who were related to or had contact with the victim's family. Hundreds of workers at the wood factory were also questioned that same day. During the investigation, Mr. Mai's younger brother and the company's delivery driver provided particularly important information. Both had received strange calls early in the morning when the murders occurred, a time believed to coincide with when the victims were killed. At approximately 3:18 a.m. on July 7th, Mr. Nguyen La Hung, 33 years old, Mrs. Nguyen Lua and Hien, NGA's younger brother, suddenly discovered 2 missed calls from his 2 nieces, Lin and Nguyen. Sensing something was wrong, he immediately called back, but neither answered. After calling several more times, Mr. Hung finally heard the familiar voices of his nieces on the other end. Uncle Hung, sounding very normal, then the phone immediately went dead, feeling uneasy. Mr. Hung continued calling his sister, Mrs. Nga. At 3:25 a.m., she answered and said briefly, "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." Hearing this, Mr. Hung was somewhat reassured and went back to sleep, not realizing that would be their last conversation. According to daily routine, around 4 a.m., a company driver would come to the villa to pick up wood for delivery. However, at 3 a.m., the driver unexpectedly received a call from Mrs. Ng Ace's number saying, "You don't need to come pick up wood today." He was surprised but followed the instructions. As the investigation expanded, police found the crime scene extremely complex. The entire grounds of Mr. Mai's house connected with the wood factory, where over 100 workers were employed. The villa's security system had multiple surveillance cameras installed, but all stopped working on the very night of the murders. According to relatives of the victims, Mr. Mai's family was renovating the back house, so they had temporarily cut off power in that area, resulting in the loss of all data from the security cameras. This made tracking down clues and catching the perpetrator extremely difficult, forcing investigators to rely entirely on physical evidence and witness testimony to find the culprit. At the crime scene, everything indicated a fierce struggle had taken place. From the living room to the hallway and out to the yard, police discovered numerous signs of resistance from the victims. Furniture knocked over, blood spattered everywhere. During the crime scene examination, forensic science officers discovered 5 suspicious fingerprints on the door. Initially, investigators assessed this could be a robbery murder, as many items in the house, such as cabinets, handbags, and wallets, showed signs of being ransacked. However, what puzzled the investigators was that some high-value assets remained intact. In the garage, there was still an Audi car worth over $210,000, another car worth over $42,000, along with many trucks for transporting goods, still parked neatly. There were no signs of theft, no evidence taken away. Everything seemed to contradict the initial robbery-murder hypothesis. Given this situation, Ben Phuc Provincial Police expanded the scope of the investigation. Starting July 10, 2015, police deployed to seal off, examine, and sweep the entire area within several hundred yards around the villa. Hundreds of officers and soldiers were mobilized, working day and night. Every trash can, bush, wall, and neighboring house compound was thoroughly searched for any trace of the perpetrator. During the crime scene examination, authorities discovered and collected a total of 156 pieces of various evidence. After thorough screening, investigators sent some important traces for examination, including many suspicious fingerprints found on doors and household items. Thanks to modern analytical equipment and advanced data comparison software, the Police Records Department quickly identified the first clues. The preliminary results helped investigators narrow down the group of suspects and gain clearer direction on the motive. One of the most important assessments made at that time was this was not the act of a single person. The evidence showed the massacre involved at least 2 perpetrators with close coordination and division of labor, signs of a meticulously prepared criminal plan to ensure proper autopsy and forensic examination at 4:30 p.m. that same day. July 7th, the bodies of the 6 victims were transferred to Chin Yen District General Hospital. There, forensic doctors collected fingerprint samples, footprints, blood samples, and tissue cells for DNA testing in comparison with evidence collected at the scene. On the bodies and neck areas of the victims were signs of being tied, along with multiple fatal stab wounds. The particularly notable point showing the brutality of the perpetrator was that all victims had been stabbed through the heart. This helped the investigation team assess that the perpetrator was not simply a robbery murderer, but must have been acquainted with and had deep conflicts with the victim's family. On the afternoon of July 8, 2015, just one day after the case was discovered, the Criminal Investigation Police Agency of Binh Phuc Provincial Police officially initiated criminal proceedings and established a special investigation team to hunt down the perpetrator responsible for the massacre of 6 people in the same family. The very next day, July 9th, police issued widespread notices calling on citizens to report crimes and provide relevant information to support the investigation. Police spread out everywhere from major roads, markets, to industrial zones around Minh Hung Commune, distributing leaflets and approaching each resident and worker, hoping to gather any small clue. In parallel, investigation teams were continuously deployed. Police summoned and took statements from dozens of witnesses and related persons, from the housekeeper for Mr. Lu Van May's family, workers at Kwai Conwood Company, to people Mr. Mai had recently laid off. All business, social, and personal relationships of the victims were narrowed down and carefully screened to track down suspects. According to information gathered, Mr. and Mrs. Mai were very benevolent, employing many poor laborers, mostly from western provinces. Besides running their business, the couple also cared about workers' lives during year-end celebrations, in addition to hosting banquets. Mrs. NGA would buy motorcycles, TVs, and refrigerators for workers to win through lucky draws. Mr. Mai's family not only employed many poor workers, but was also a philanthropist in the locality. Overall, the couple lived harmoniously with neighbors and had never violated the law. Recently, Mr. Mai had invested in a plot of land in Hong Kong district. Binh Phu planning to gradually relocate the factory away from residential areas, Mr. Mai had moved much machinery and equipment there. However, this was also a time when the couple's business encountered obstacles. On one occasion, Mr. Mai told a younger relative that he owed suppliers about $210,000 to $420,000. The previous Friday, Mr. Mai had scheduled to meet a creditor to repay money, but he had gone to Ho Chi Minh City, so the matter didn't proceed as planned. In addition, all psychological developments of relatives and funeral attendees were observed by investigators and placed within the scope of suspects. During the investigation, when looking into who among the relationships of each victim was currently in conflict, the lead that police particularly focused on was the relationship of L.A. Tian Lin, Mr. Mai's daughter. Lin had been in love with a young man for several years before. With the evidence initially collected, it could be determined that Lin's romantic relationship had grounds to lead to resentment. Moreover, an initial suspect, Lin's current boyfriend, also stated that recently Lin had been worried because her ex-boyfriend had called to threaten her. From the initial information gathered, investigators narrowed down to one suspicious person. Although this person had a complete alibi, investigators still decided to place him under special surveillance. That was Nguyen Hai Duong, born February 1, 1991, from Quy Ninh Commune, Chao Mua District in Giang Province. Occupation worker, no criminal record. With a gentle appearance and quiet demeanor, Duong could hardly make anyone think he was involved in such a horrific massacre. But what caught police attention was Duong's past relationship with La Tien Lin, the eldest daughter of the victim's family. The two had dated for a time, and Duong had even lived with Mr. Mai's family for a period. However, this relationship faced fierce opposition from Lin's family. Ultimately, Lin was the one who initiated the breakup, while Duong could not accept it. What particularly caught detectives' attention was Duong's attitude during the funeral days. On July 8th, when the bodies of the 6 victims were released for burial, Duong showed no fear or avoidance of people's gazes. But it was this abnormally calm demeanor that triggered the professional instincts of investigators. While many relatives and friends were still in shock, Duong was too calm, too in control of his emotions. Right at the funeral, police quietly approached. After some skillful conversation, they invited Nguyen Hai Duong to the station for questioning. The first time being summoned by investigators, Nguyen Hai Duong appeared very calm and stubborn. With a stone-cold face and decisive voice, Duong firmly denied any involvement in the massacre. Throughout the session, he continuously questioned the investigators back, deliberately probing weaknesses in their reasoning, and repeatedly mentioning the alibi he had meticulously prepared. Duong was so confident, he almost challenged the investigation force. He said there could be no evidence to convict him, because on the night of the murders, the night of July 6th, he had invited friends to gather in Hackman until late, with many witnesses. After that, Duong returned to the wood factory dormitory where he stayed, brushed his teeth, washed his face, did all his daily activities in front of the security camera, then went to sleep. All those images were clearly recorded, along with matching testimony from his drinking buddies, creating a perfect alibi. With such calmness and confidence, Duong seemed to believe he had created perfect smokescreen, enough to deceive even the most experienced investigators. However, in a very brief moment, Duong revealed his first slip. When an investigator suddenly said, looking so gentle, "How dare you murder 6 people from the same family?" Duong immediately laughed, answering quickly, as if prepared, "Sir, you're joking. I don't even dare kill a chicken. How would I dare kill people?" The answer seemed light-hearted, but Duong's eyes flickered slightly. Just that 1 second of panic, enough for the experienced investigator to notice something was wrong. Those who had worked in criminal investigation for many years all knew that perpetrators could hide their words, but couldn't hide their eyes. And it was that fleeting tremor in Duong's eyes that made investigators certain they were on the right track. Due to insufficient evidence, investigators had to temporarily release Nguyen Hai Duong, but detectives still secretly monitored his every move closely. On July 9th, the first investigative breakthrough appeared. When checking call logs in the phones of 3 victims, Lin, Miao, and Vi, police discovered a series of unusual calls. All originated from a strange phone number registered with an untraceable SIM card with no identity. What particularly caught investigators' attention was that on the afternoon before the murders, this phone number contacted Lin twice, including one quite long call, showing a close relationship between them. Not only that, on the same evening, that phone number continued calling Miao and Vi, the remaining victims. Most notably was the last text message sent to Vaya, recorded just a few dozen minutes before the massacre occurred. This made the biggest question in the case increasingly clear. Who could contact Lin, Miao, and Vi all at once, right before the tragedy occurred? The answer seemed to have only one possibility. Nguyen Hai Duong, someone who had been close to Lin, had lived in the same house and knew the entire family's habits too well. Immediately, Duong was summoned for the second time, but like before, he maintained a cold, stubborn attitude, continued denying all involvement, and relied on his prepared alibi to counter police. And once again, Nguyen Hai Duong was still not arrested. However, with all efforts and sophisticated investigative techniques, investigators finally discovered the truth. Duong was the owner of the mysterious burner SIM, and he had been at the crime scene at the exact time the massacre occurred. Immediately, an emergency meeting was convened at 1 p.m. on July 10th. In the investigation team's meeting room, the atmosphere was tense. On the table were numerous diagrams, crime scene maps, location data, and forensic evidence just returned. When the lead investigator presented the entire sequence of events, all the final pieces fit together perfectly. The conclusion was reached. Nguyen Hai Duong is one of the perpetrators of this massacre. Without wasting time, Duong was summoned for the 3rd time. Unlike the previous 2 times, this time he appeared wary and deliberately difficult. As soon as he entered the interrogation room, Duong leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, then calmly said, "If there's no lawyer, I won't answer anything." His cold, defiant attitude made the atmosphere in the room thick. But for experienced investigators, this was just a stalling tactic from someone who was afraid. Evidence was presented one by one before Duong. Duong's eyes began to waver. He tried to laugh it off, said a few evasive things, but his voice grew quieter. Investigators continued their persuasion. His face grew pale, lips trembling, sweat pouring out. Just a few minutes later, Duong buried his face in the table. His whole body slumped. When asked about the motive, Duong said he had been nurturing revenge for over 6 months. During the preparation time, he had watched many American detective films, learning how to erase traces, hide movements, and create alibis. This made him overconfident, thinking he could be so perfect that no one could trace him. Before acting, Duong had called Lin many times, both to probe and to vent his resentment. In one final call, he told Lin that your family made me hate, love, and hate this whole life. A warning of the tragedy to come. As soon as Duong's confession matched all evidence and testimony, an arrest warrant was issued. Detectives immediately headed to Vu Van Tien's family boarding house. The winding alley full of mud after the afternoon rain couldn't stop the steps of justice. At 5 p.m. on July 10th, the investigation team raided the boarding house and arrested suspect Vu Van Tien as he was preparing to flee. The search seized almost all the murder weapons and stolen property that the suspects hadn't yet disposed of or hidden. After being arrested, Tien realized he couldn't deny it, and immediately confessed on the spot about the entire process of planning and executing the massacre of Mr. May's family. At 10 a.m. on July 11th, Binh Phuc provincial police officers escorted suspect Vu Van Tien to headquarters for investigation. After graduating from 12th grade, Nguyen Hai Duong was taken by his father to Saigon to learn a trade, but dropped out, claiming it had no future. Sometime later, Duong returned to work as a laborer at his uncle's wood factory, and stayed in the security room with his father. During his time working there in 2013, Nguyen Duong met La Tien Lin at a birthday party. Despite knowing Duong's poor circumstances, the daughter of the wealthy timber family in Chon Tan district, Binh Phuc still devoted her love to him. During their time together, Duong brought Lin home to meet his family several times, and both thought about marriage. However, their relationship frequently had conflicts and arguments. To help her future husband build a career, Lin lent Duong nearly $21,000 to buy rubber plantation land in Binh Phuc. By February 2015, while Lin's mother was demanding her daughter end the relationship with Duong, he discovered Lin had a new boyfriend. 4 months before the murders was when Duong was decisively rejected by Lin. Duong said he loved Lin passionately. After breaking up, even though he had met and loved someone else, Duong still felt he couldn't live without Lin, and repeatedly tried to reconcile. When firmly rejected by Lin, Duong became hateful. He especially directed that hatred toward Mrs. Na, because Duong knew Mrs. Na was the one who blocked his love with Lin. Looking down on Duong's poverty, and wanting to marry Lin to the son of another wealthy family. Meanwhile, Lin obeyed her mother and broke up with Duong. He conceived the idea to murder Lin's entire family for revenge, and to rob their property. To prepare for the crime, Nguyen Hai Duong meticulously planned buying a BB gun worth $250, an electric stun gun worth $85, a 12-inch tie knife, a 3-inch folding knife, burner SIM cards for communication, gloves and masks to cover his face, borrowing a motorcycle from his Aunt Tran T. Trin, along with plastic zip ties and duct tape as murder tools. At noon on July 6th, Duong met Tien at a cafe, and invited him to participate in robbing property from a well-off family in Chon Tun district. Binh Phuc Duong fabricated a story. "Help me with this. I invested about $33,500 in rubber wood with that guy, but he sold the wood and kept the money without paying back. Now we have to rob it back." Tien advised his friend to report to police. But Duong lied that investing without paperwork meant police couldn't intervene. Being financially desperate, Tien agreed to participate. Having lived at Lin's house, Nguyen Hai Duong was quite close to the siblings Nu and Viet. Nu often helped with household chores, while Vi was particularly fond of gaming. Knowing both siblings needed spending money, Duong contacted them to plan stealing money from Mrs. Nga to split among them. According to the plan, Nu would notify when Mr. Mai's house had money. When security cameras stopped working, and the time the driver usually came to transport was around 3 to 4 a.m., Vi would be responsible for opening the gate for Duong to come in and take the property. On the evening of July 6th, Duong repeatedly called Vi to discuss the plan, but the boy didn't answer. Calling Nu to check the situation, she also didn't respond. At this point, Nguyen Hai Duong had to change his plan to cooperate with the two siblings as initially intended. According to the pre-planned schedule, after 11 p.m. on July 6th, Nguyen Hai Duong returned home after drinking in Hoc Mon and deliberately walked in front of the wood factory camera. When getting into bed, Duong lay on the upper bunk while his father slept below. Duong then poked a hole through the roof and climbed out. He didn't use his own vehicle, but went to an acquaintance's room to borrow a motorcycle. Then took Vu Van Tien to Mr. Mai's friend earlier, inserted a burner SIM to contact Vi when arriving. When both rode from Saigon to Binh Phuc, Tien was only then told Duong's plan. "Later when we get there, I'll call the boy to open the gate. If I do something to the kid, and he screams you cover his mouth, I'll go inside to get money, then come out. Around 1 a.m. on July 7th, 2015, Duong and Tien wore gloves, helmets, and face masks. Riding the motorcycle to Mr. Mai's gate, then texted to Levi to open the gate with a promise of $85. When Vi opened the door, Duong immediately tied the boy's hands. Vi had just managed to cry, "Dad," when Tien covered his mouth while Duong strangled his neck. About 2 minutes later, the boy lost consciousness. At this point, Tien panicked, saying, "Let's go back. The boy is still alive. We can still save him." Duong reassured him. "I already discussed with you. How can we go back now? Going back ruins my whole plan." Saying this, Duong pulled out a knife and stabbed repeatedly, killing Vi. Witnessing his friend use a knife to kill the boy, Tien again urged, "Let's just go. The boy is dead. Nobody knows." Duong pressured his accomplice, "We're in too deep. Let's go in the house to get money, then leave. If we go back now, we can never do this again." Duong went ahead toward the side of the villa, but seeing Tien still standing frozen where Vi was killed, waved his hand, signaling to follow. Reaching the second floor, Duong continued instructing the plan. "In the room are 2 women, one lying on the bed, one on the floor. You go in and restrain the one on the floor while I restrain the one on the bed." Hearing Tien say he couldn't do it and wanted to leave, Duong coaxed, "We're in too deep now. Just restrain them, get the money and leave." The 2 are very gentle. Duong would restrain Lin while Tien would do the same with Nyo. When entering the room, Tien shook Nyo, but the girl remained deep in sleep, so he couldn't restrain her according to plan. He quickly signaled to Duong, then grabbed his backpack to the balcony, intending to leave. Duong chased after, pleading, and Tien said fearfully, "I can't do it. I still have my parents." Duong replied, "I also have parents. We're in too deep. Let's go in and do it. Go downstairs to get money, then leave." Both used guns to threaten, then tied Lin and Nyo, used duct tape to cover their mouths, then tied them to windows in separate rooms. Although tightly bound, the victims still tried to use their feet to get their phones and call Mr. Hung, discovering the situation. Mr. Hung called back. Duong forced Nyo to answer in a normal voice, then quickly hung up. Next, Duong and Tien brought weapons downstairs. Going straight to the bedroom of Mr. and Mrs. along with their 2 young children, Kwok Ken and baby Na, Duong shouted, "This is a robbery. Give us money or I'll shoot you dead." Seeing Duong holding a gun, Mr. Mai begged, "Take whatever you want." Tien tied Mr. Mai, and Mrs. Na separated Kwok Ken to the next room to interrogate about where money was hidden, while Duong covered Kwok Ken's face, then cruelly murdered the boy, unable to extract information about where money was hidden. At this point, Mr. Hung called Mrs. Na's number, asking why Nyes Nu called. Duong quickly forced Mrs. Na to answer according to his instructions. At this point, Mrs. Na and Mr. had recognized Duong, pleading, "Duong, take whatever you want and leave. The delivery driver will arrive soon." They forced Mrs. Na to call the driver to cancel the trip. Next, Tien and Duong forced Mrs. Na to open the safe looking for money, but it was empty. They dragged Mrs. Na to the next room to continue interrogating. Getting no answer, they used the Thai knife to stab Mrs. Na to death with multiple wounds. Right then, hearing noise at the door, Duong rushed out and discovered Mr. Mai had freed himself from his bonds, about to open the door to escape. Duong lunged forward, pressing the knife to his face, shouting, running, "Get back in here." Mr. Mai trembled. "I wasn't running. I thought you guys left, so I came out." Not long after, Mr. Mai was also killed for refusing to reveal where money was hidden. At this point, Tien told Duong, "Let's leave, it's getting light, people will come." Duong replied, "Those 2 know my face. Let's go up and finish them, then leave. We're in too deep, let's see it through." Tien said, "It's morning, we don't have time." Duong again pleaded, "We have time, let's finish up then leave." After killing 3 people on the first floor, they returned to the second floor to interrogate and go about where money was hidden. Getting no answer, Duong killed Ngu first, then moved to Lin's room. Lin was the final victim. Before killing her, he said, "I have to do this because I was treated so badly." Perhaps at this moment, Lin realized it was Nguyen Hai Duong, but immediately after, she was coldly finished off by her ex-lover. Throughout the crime, although Tien tried to stop him multiple times, each time, Duong said, "We're in too deep." He continued following instructions, tying and strangling each victim. Duong used the folding knife and Thai knife to stab straight into victims' hearts, then continued stabbing necks and slashing across brutally, not stopping there. They also used blindfolds and stun guns to torture victims before killing them. After committing the murders, both ransacked for property. When returning to Mr. Mai's room to take items, change bloodstained clothes, and turn on lights, Duong discovered 18-month-old baby Na, Mr. Mai's youngest child, crying. He picked up the little girl to rock her to sleep, then searched the closet for clothes before fleeing. When returning to Tien's boarding house around 6:30 a.m. on July 7th, the two checked the stolen property, an iPad, laptop, 5 phones, and about $170 in cash, along with clothes and murder weapons like knives, guns, and shoes. Everything was put in a backpack and given to Tien to keep. After 7 a.m. on July 7th, Duong Goen opened Facebook and learned that the housekeeper had discovered Mr. Mai's entire family murdered. He immediately took a motorcycle to the crime scene around 11:30 a.m. Meanwhile, Tien took the backpack containing evidence to the Saigon riverbank to hide. In the following days, Duong continuously returned to the crime scene, appearing grief-stricken, crying in front of the victims' relatives so no one suspected him. After a month of persistent investigation on August 10th, authorities arrested the third suspect in the case, Tran Dinh Thuy, born May 23, 1988, living in Ho Chi Minh City. Occupation cook. Thuy finished 9th grade, then went to Ho Chi Minh City to study refrigeration, but after graduating didn't work in that field, instead helping cook at a relative's restaurant in Saigon. 3 months earlier, while going for coffee with a younger sibling, Thuy happened to meet and win Hai Duong and gradually became close friends. Hearing Duong say he was pooling capital with relatives to buy liquidated rubber to sell for profit, and because the border area had many robbers, needed to buy a stun gun for self-defense, though he enthusiastically showed his friend how to buy online. When Duong bought weapons, he also showed them off to Thuy a week before the incident. Duong confided to Thuy that he had been cheated out of over $12,500 by his girlfriend's family in Bin Phuc in a business investment, inviting Thuy to rob it back. He promised to only take back his capital, giving all access to Thuy. To increase credibility, Duong affirmed the plan was thoroughly prepared. Initially, Thuy hesitated, advising his friend to openly demand the money or ask police to intervene. However, Duong continuously persuaded that the plan was ready, no one would discover it. Plus, that family was very wealthy, so Thuy finally agreed. At 11:30 p.m. on July 3rd, Duong took Thuy by motorcycle from Hac Minh District, Ho Chi Minh City, straight to Mr. Mai's house. On the way, Duong explained the plan. There are 7 people in the house. When someone comes to the gate, restrain them, then go upstairs to tie up 2 girls, then go downstairs to restrain the homeowners, open the safe to get money. While discussing, Duong suddenly revealed he hated the homeowners, so would kill them. Thuy was horrified, saying just rob, don't kill people. Seeing his friend worried, Duong quickly reassured, after getting money, you go out first. Let me handle it. Only now did Thuy truly realize this was Nguyen Hai Duong's plan to rob and murder. But having already gotten on the motorcycle, could only stay silent. After over 2 hours, both arrived in front of Mr. Mai's villa gate. Seeing no one come to open the door, Thuy urged Duong, but Duong disagreed. After over an hour waiting with no results, Nguyen Hai Duong finally agreed to get on the motorcycle back to Ho Chi Minh City. Both agreed to return to Mr. Mai's house the next day to commit the crime. On the way back, Thuy discussed with Duong that Thuy would buy an additional Thai knife, so tomorrow when they go, Duong agreed. By the evening of July 5, 2015, had bought a Thai knife to give Duong, along with a backpack, but then said his grandmother was sick, so wouldn't go with Duong anymore. At this point, Duong took Thuy's phone to text Vi, asking the boy to come down and open the villa gate. This was also the key point to arrest Thuy. Unable to persuade Thuy, Duong turned to invite Tien to carry out the plot with him. Additionally, before executing the massacre, Duong invited his aunt, Tran Thi Trinh, 31 years old, to go to Mr. Mai's house to test whether anyone would notice if Vi went outside. Duong told his aunt he was going to a friend's house to get items, coinciding with the time he would go with Thuy and Tien. Both times going with accomplices to Mr. Mai's villa, Duong borrowed his aunt's motorcycle. However, through investigation, police determined that Duong's aunt and the friend whose phone Duong borrowed didn't know about the plan and the murders, so didn't consider criminal liability. On the morning of December 17, 2015, Bin Phuc Provincial People's Court held a mobile trial of Nguyen Hai Duong, Vu Van Tien, and Tran Dinh Thuy on a 10-acre vacant lot in Chan Ninh District Administrative Center. The three defendants were prosecuted for murder and robbery after killing 6 people in Mr. Le Van Mai's family the previous July. Over 300 police were mobilized to ensure trial security. At the first instance trial, the court sentenced Nguyen Hai Duong to death for murder and 8 years imprisonment for robbery. Total sentence, death, Vu Van Tien to death for murder and 7 years imprisonment for robbery. Total sentence, death, Tran Dien Tho Yi to 13 years imprisonment for murder and 3 years imprisonment for robbery. Total sentence, 16 years imprisonment. Afterward, the accomplices and victims' families continuously filed appeals after multiple postponements. The High Legal People's Court in Ho Chi Minh City decided to hold an appellate trial on July 18th and 19th, 2016. The trial panel would review petitions to reduce Vu Van Tien's death sentence and Tran Dien Tho's 16-year sentence. Both accomplices have mastermind Nguyen Hai Duong. However, on the afternoon of July 18th, after 1 day of trial, the High Legal People's Court in Ho Chi Minh City rejected all appeals upholding the death sentence for Vu Van Tien and 16 years imprisonment for Tho Ai for murder and robbery charges. Subsequently, Nguyen Hai Duong and Vu Van Tien were executed by lethal injection in Binh Duong province. Story 4. In southern India, there was once a man so charming, so considerate that any woman would have dreamed of marrying him. But overnight, he turned into someone unrecognizable, cold, brutal, and terrifying. What could possibly transform such a man into a cold-blooded killer? The story begins with Anita Bangera, a young woman living in the town of Bantwell, located in the Daksina, Kannada district of Karnataka state. At 22 years old, an age often considered ideal for marriage in many Indian families, Anita had become a source of growing concern for her parents. They scraped together every rupee they could, sometimes cutting back on household expenses, just to save enough for a dowry that might win favor with a future groom's family. But despite searching far and wide, they still hadn't found a suitable match. The mood in the house grew heavier each day, especially as neighbors began whispering about why she still wasn't married. Then, on the morning of June 17th, and while the family was preparing breakfast as usual, Anita quietly slipped away. She took with her some gold jewelry, a sum of cash, and a mobile phone worth around $3,148 a gift from her family for her eventual wedding. Without a word, she left the house and disappeared. The moment her absence was discovered, her family panicked and rushed to the police. But to their shock and dismay, the local authorities refused to treat the case seriously. They labeled it a typical runaway romance, suggesting that Anita had likely eloped with a Muslim man and might even be coerced into converting to Islam. Less than 48 hours later, the police declared that Anita had indeed converted and was now living with a Muslim man, despite providing no concrete evidence to support the claim. The family was outraged by the assumption. Frustrated and desperate, they turned to Hindu community leaders and youth organizations for help. Soon, a crowd of at least 150 people formed and marched to the police station in protest. They demanded a full investigation and warned that if the case wasn't taken seriously, they would burn down the station themselves. Faced with growing unrest, senior police officials could no longer ignore the situation. Fearing that tensions might spiral into religious conflict, they quickly elevated Anita's disappearance to a high-priority investigation. Once the case was officially reopened, investigators realized it was far more complex than they had expected. Anita had vanished without leaving any notes or witnesses behind. The only clue they had was the phone she had taken with her. When they accessed her call records, they discovered that prior to disappearing, she had been in frequent contact with an unfamiliar number, one her family didn't recognize. Following that lead, police began investigating the owner of the phone number. Records revealed it was registered to a man named Sridhar. Living in the city of Mapakari, officers quickly moved in and arrested him. It looked like on the verge of a breakthrough until Sridhar explained that, although the number was under his name, it had actually been used all along by his sister, Kaveri Manku. He added that Kaveri had gone missing under mysterious circumstances back on March 17th, and no one had heard from her since. Realizing that Sridhar's testimony might be connected to another missing person case, police immediately shifted their focus to reviewing Kaveri's call records. The findings were strikingly similar to Anita's situation. Kaveri had also begun frequent communication with an unknown number shortly before her disappearance. Investigators followed the same tracing procedure, but this time, the results sent chills down their spines. The number was registered to a woman named Pushpa Vosakota, who had also vanished without a trace. Seeing a disturbing pattern emerge, police followed the next lead, which brought them to another woman named Vinuta Pajan. Unsurprisingly, she too had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. By that point, 4 women had gone missing in eerily similar ways. Only then did investigators fully grasp the magnitude of the case. The situation escalated to the point where regional law enforcement was forced to mobilize. A statewide alert was issued across Karnataka, with all police departments instructed to share reports of missing women and any unexplained deaths, particularly from the past few years. What came back was more disturbing than anyone expected. After filtering the reports, local police stations identified over 20 missing women and dozens of unexplained deaths that could be linked. One of those cases occurred approximately 99.4 miles from Anita's hometown in the city of Hassan. Then on June 18th, the first major break in the case emerged. Local police in Hassan discovered the body of a woman in the restroom of the city's bus station. Her family confirmed it was Anita. She was found wearing a traditional bridal sari, but strangely, none of the jewelry she took from home was on her. Forensic analysis was quickly added to the case file. The report confirmed that Anita had died of cyanide poisoning. Curiously, the restroom door had been locked from the inside, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. All evidence initially pointed to suicide, but this raised serious questions. Why would a woman who had just been joyfully planning her wedding, talking with her family, and purchasing her bridal outfits suddenly take her own life? And why would she appear nearly 100 miles from home, dressed as a bride and alone? The deeper investigators looked, the more things didn't add up. While no clear conclusions could be drawn yet, one thing became evident. If they could find the central link in this chain of disappearances and deaths, the entire truth would eventually come to light. Driven by that belief, the investigation ramped up. More units joined the task force, and the method remained the same. Trace every unknown phone number. Layer by layer, the digital trail led them to a shocking list of 20 missing women. Further analysis of location data revealed that all of them had, at some point, been in the same place, Daxanakada village. Even more telling, every SIM card used by these women had been inserted into the same mobile phone, connecting the dots. Investigators identified the owner of the phone as the key suspect in the case. Police concluded that he had been using each previous victim's phone number to contact the next, repeating the same tactic with chilling precision, creating a deadly chain of deception carefully orchestrated in advance. Following the digital trail, they eventually reached a conclusion. It quickly became clear that he was not the man they were looking for. Danish explained that the phone had been given to him by his uncle, Mohan Kumar, a former elementary school teacher in the area. When police went to verify his employment, they were told Mohan had been fired long ago, and no one had seen him since. With the trail suddenly going cold, police broadened their approach. They began cross-referencing missing persons reports from other districts and retracing possible travel routes Mohan might have taken, hoping to find new leads that had been overlooked. Then came a breakthrough. A local seamstress named Sumitra walked into the police station and shared a crucial piece of information. She said that back in June, she had seen Mohan personally escort Anita onto a bus headed for Hassan. She also recalled that in 2005, Mohan had approached her under the guise of being an agricultural officer and confessed romantic feelings for her, though she turned him down. Strangely, after years of silence, he had recently started contacting her again. Seizing the opportunity, the police crafted an undercover operation. They asked Sumitra to pretend she was willing to marry Mohan and used the wedding discussion as an excuse to set up a meeting at a predetermined location. Mohan agreed without hesitation. Everything was set. On October 21, 2009, Sumitra arrived at the Dakshinakannada district bus as planned, while undercover officers lay in wait. As soon as Mohan appeared, plainclothes officers closed in and apprehended him. The man behind a months-long killing spree that had left police baffled was finally in custody. But what happened next surprised even the investigators. As news of the arrest spread, locals expressed disbelief. Many insisted Mohan was a polite, soft-spoken school teacher who always behaved respectfully. His wife even described him as the perfect husband, a devoted family man who couldn't possibly be a killer. However, the truth painted a much darker picture. Mohan Kumar was born on April 6, 1963, into a poor Dalit family in Karnataka's Dakshinakannada district. He was the eldest of two children, with a younger sister 5 years his junior. Both of his parents worked as manual laborers, struggling to survive at the bottom of India's rigid caste hierarchy. When Mohan was just 10 years old, his father abruptly abandoned the family, vanishing without a word. Despite the hardship, Mohan's mother fought to keep him in school. Determined that her son would break the cycle of poverty through education, Mohan didn't waste the opportunity. He studied hard and eventually earned admission into one of India's top universities, a rare achievement in their village. For a time, Mohan Kumar was considered a local hero, the pride of his struggling community. After graduating, Mohan was hired as a teacher at a public elementary school in the Dakshinakannada district through a state-administered civil service exam. Every day he showed up to school dressed neatly, speaking politely, and acting with humility. To colleagues and students alike, he was the model teacher, respected, admired, and well-liked. In 1987, at the age of 25, Mohan married an 18-year-old woman named Mary. They were once deeply in love, but the marriage quickly deteriorated. Mary was a devout Christian and refused to convert to Hinduism, as Mohan's family had expected. Their religious differences proved irreconcilable, and the couple soon divorced. By 1992, Mohan married again, this time to a woman named Manjula. After the wedding, Manjula proved to be loving and devoted. She gave birth to 2 children, and took care of the household with dedication. But despite having a stable family, Mohan remained unsatisfied. While still living with Manjula, he secretly married another woman named Shradhavi, who later bore him 2 more children. Mohan kept both families entirely separate. Neither wife knew about the other. To both Manjula and Shradhavi, he was a responsible husband who provided financial support on time every month and made sure the family never had to worry about expenses. To his children, Mohan was a warm and attentive father. He played with them often and spent quality time at home. But behind the curtain of this double life, Mohan's professional record began to unravel. He was suspended multiple times for skipping classes and inappropriate behavior towards students. Eventually, he was transferred to another school. The most serious incident occurred in 2003 when he pushed a woman into a river. Fortunately, a nearby fisherman rescued her just in time. Mohan was prosecuted for attempted murder. In court, he denied the charges, claiming that the woman had once proposed to him, but was rejected. According to Mohan, during a heated argument, she slipped and fell into the river by accident. He insisted he never pushed her. Perhaps because he was a school teacher, the judge showed leniency, believing his version of the story. Mohan was sentenced to just 1 month in jail. But those 30 days behind bars would prove to be a turning point. While in custody, Mohan befriended an inmate who was a goldsmith, serving time for an environmental poisoning case. The man had used cyanide solution to extract precious metals, then dumped the toxic waste carelessly in an open field. As a result, 8 cows grazing on contaminated grass collapsed and died on the spot. The night before his release, while the entire prison was asleep, the goldsmith leaned in and whispered to Mohan, "Just a little cyanide is enough to kill a chicken, a goat, even a person. It works so fast, they won't even have time to react." He added that cyanide was easy to obtain. No permits, no paperwork, and the price was only about $3 for 2 pounds. Mohan said nothing. He simply stared at the concrete floor in silence. The next morning, Mohan walked out of the prison with a small bag and a blank expression. But when he returned to the city, nothing was the same. The school where he had once worked reviewed his record. Considering both his criminal offense and his history of disciplinary issues, and decided to officially terminate his employment. Mohan was furious. He applied for short-term teaching jobs elsewhere, but most schools rejected him due to his tarnished background. Even non-teaching jobs proved difficult to get. Some avoided him, others simply said no outright. With each rejection, the weight of failure grew heavier. Mohan couldn't accept that he had fallen to the bottom of society. To cope, he avoided talking about his work situation and cut off contact with family and friends, as if by not acknowledging the truth, it might somehow cease to exist. Instead of facing reality, Mohan built an illusion. He lied, telling his family he was still teaching at a remote mountain school. Every day, he dressed in long-sleeved shirts and neatly pressed trousers, left home on schedule, and maintained the appearance of a respectable educator. The lie was enough to keep his family calm. But the financial burden of supporting 2 separate households continued to weigh him down. While he managed to keep up the facade on the outside, inside, Mohan was beginning to crack. As his savings dried up, he started entertaining options he would never have considered before. That was when the prison conversation about cyanide replayed clearly in his mind. A cheap, fast-acting, and nearly undetectable poison. Each detail began to feel like a blueprint for a dark plan taking shape. In the slum where he lived, Mohan noticed a specific kind of vulnerability. Men rarely carried cash, but women, especially young brides-to-be, often wore gold rings, bangles, and necklaces. These items could easily be sold or pawned. This tradition stemmed from depraved gender inequality in India, where sons are often favored over daughters. Women tend to have lower social status, fewer job opportunities, and are expected to focus on domestic duties after marriage, making them more likely to be seen as financial burdens. From this harsh reality, Mohan began closely observing households preparing for their daughters during this time. The bride's family is responsible for gathering gifts like gold jewelry, money, and other valuables to present to the groom's side, a form of dowry to ease the separation. In poor families, or when the bride was considered less attractive, finding a husband became even harder. Parents would often spend years working themselves to the bone just to collect a generous dowry. Mohan knew this, and he saw a way to exploit it. With this understanding, he created a new identity, a wealthy businessman. Quietly, he acquired cyanide from a chemical supplier. Now armed with poison, he began calculating his next move, how to get women to meet him voluntarily with all their valuables in tow without raising any suspicion. At the same time, he needed to ensure their families would be too ashamed or afraid to go to the police after the crime was committed. With careful planning, Mohan began to construct a profile of his ideal victim. Poor women between the ages of 25 and 30, with average looks and no significant social standing or family influence. These were women often afraid of never getting married, and if they went missing or were harmed, their absence would barely register a reaction from the community. He devised a step-by-step strategy to approach and earn their trust. First, Mohan enrolled in matchmaking services to scout potential targets, secretly gathering details about each woman's background and family situation. Once he found someone who fit his criteria, he would pretend to be a government employee newly transferred from another town or a man with a stable job, just enough to seem respectable without raising suspicion. Then, he'd initiate casual conversation and ask for her phone number. If the woman responded positively, he would invite her out for tea or coffee, just a simple date, and if she accepted without hesitation, he knew he already had the upper hand. Next, he would suggest a walk in the park, subtly gauging her comfort level with light physical contact. Over time, he nurtured the relationship, building trust, and when the moment felt right, he would express his desire to marry her. Under the mask of a polite, educated man with a calm demeanor, Mohan seemed like a genuine, respectful partner. Most women he targeted quickly fell for the illusion. Once the woman was fully convinced, he began discussing marriage. Rather than proposing a lavish wedding in the city, Mohan would suggest a simple ceremony in his rural hometown or at a small, quiet temple to avoid attracting attention. To ease any doubts from the woman's family, he even paid them visits, acted serious about the relationship, and clearly laid out wedding plans, making it seem like everything was already arranged. With such a convincing picture of love and commitment, it was rare for the women to say no. They would carefully do their makeup. Where vibrant socks adorn themselves with the gold jewelry their families had prepared, and carry with them a heart full of excitement and trust, walking straight into the deadly trap Mohan had constructed. Even more chilling, Mohan meticulously timed his proposals, deliberately tracking each woman's menstrual cycle to strike during their most vulnerable period, taking advantage of this trust. He would invite the woman to stay at a hotel near the train station, far from his own neighborhood, for one night before the supposed wedding in his hometown. In that private setting, he used sweet words to mask his ulterior motive, initiating intimacy under the guise of affection. The next morning, he would suggest a relaxing walk and persuade her to place all her jewelry and important documents into the hotel safe, warning that the journey home could be dangerous and they might get robbed. Without a second thought, she'd comply, while Mohan quietly collected everything and prepared to leave with it once they checked out. Everything unfolded exactly as Mohan had planned. As they walked around the train station, he acted tender and affectionate, painting a picture of the happy future they would share. Taking advantage of her vulnerability, he suddenly changed his tone, telling her that they had been intimate the night before without using protection. He warned that if she became pregnant before the wedding, it would bring shame to her family, and possibly lead to the ceremony being called off due to social pressure. Exploiting her fear and confusion, Mohan pretended to help by offering a pill he had prepared in advance. He told her it was emergency contraception and advised her to take it in the station restroom if she started feeling uncomfortable. Trusting him completely, the woman took the pill into the restroom, locked the door, and swallowed it. Just as Mohan instructed, she had no idea the pill contained cyanide, a deadly poison that can kill within minutes. Within moments of ingestion, her body began to convulse violently before collapsing inside the restroom. She reached for the door, but was unable to call for help. Outside, Mohan waited calmly for about 30 minutes. If she didn't come out, he knew his plan had worked. He then returned to the hotel, packed all the jewelry into a suitcase, and quickly boarded the next train, disappearing into the crowd. To avoid detection, Mohan didn't sell the jewelry immediately. He typically waited several days before taking it to a jewelry shop in another town to exchange for cash. The money was then split between his two wives, who lived separately and knew nothing of each other. All of Mohan's victims were poor young women with little education and families too under-resourced to search for them. Their relatives assumed the women had simply married far away, and when they stopped responding, it raised no alarm. To reinforce that belief, Mohan used the victims' own phones to send messages back home, saying they were happy and well in their new lives, and there was no need to worry. In reality, though families never filed police reports, the bodies of these women were eventually discovered, sometimes within hours, sometimes after several days. Each time a body was found, Indian police opened a case. But instead of launching a serious investigation, most of the cases were quickly ruled suicides. Many files contained just a few lines of summary before being shoved into a drawer, ignoring all the red flags present at the scene. The reasons were disturbingly simple. There were no signs of physical assault, the restroom doors were locked from the inside, the families never reported the women missing, and the train stations were too crowded to trace anyone, rather than investigate further. Authorities often concluded the women had died of sudden cardiac arrest or unknown causes, skipping autopsies and even identity verification. Still, there were a few officers who sensed something was off, especially when multiple young women were dying suddenly and inexplicably. In some cases, medical tests even revealed traces of cyanide in their blood. But those suspicions were dismissed. No investigation was pursued, and one by one the murders faded into obscurity, while the killer remained in plain sight. Tracking down the killer became even more difficult because Mohan committed his crimes in multiple regions, each managed by a separate police department. These departments only handled cases within their own jurisdictions, rarely shared information with one another, and lacked a unified database to cross-reference or connect similar deaths across districts. As a result, no one realized these were linked cases with the same perpetrator. Each woman's suspicious death was treated as an isolated incident, filed away quickly, without triggering any broader alerts. Meanwhile, Mohan constantly changed identities. Sometimes he posed as a recently divorced man, other times as a meticulous doctor or a polite government officer. With his respectable appearance and sweet talking promises, he gradually inserted himself into the lives of unsuspecting young women. From that point forward, Mohan's boldness escalated beyond all bounds. He developed a repeatable cycle for his crimes. Whenever he needed money, he would seek out a new target. Once the relationship progressed to a level of emotional closeness, his plan kicked into gear. It began with a proposal aimed at gaining access to the woman's assets, and ended with a carefully staged poisoning disguised as a tragic accident. What's truly terrifying is that this string of murders went unchecked for years, with virtually no intervention from authorities. Between 2005 and 2009 alone, at least 21 women died under suspicious circumstances, and these deaths might have remained unnoticed if not for the determination of Anita's family. They not only filed repeated complaints, but also mobilized over 150 local residents to protest at the police station, going so far as to threaten to burn it down if the case was ignored any longer. However, it wasn't until the public pressure spilled beyond the local level that the media began to take notice. The wave of poisoning deaths suddenly gripped national attention, shocking all of India. Major outlets like Deccan Herald and the Times of India featured the story on their front pages. For weeks, nightly news programs covered the unfolding scandal, until Mohan's name was overshadowed by a new, chilling nickname: Cyanide. Mohan. Even under intense public scrutiny and relentless media coverage, Mohan remained cold and defiant. Throughout his time in pretrial detention, he denied all allegations, insisting he had never harmed anyone, but a police search quickly shattered that lie. At the home of one of his wives, officers found a large stash of cyanide powder for cell phones, a fake government seal, business cards with various job titles, and dozens of receipts from gold sales, along with jewelry that had not yet been sold. Forensic analysis confirmed that some of the items belonged to Anita and another identified victim. As police built a stronger case, the horror began to ripple into Mohan's own household. His two wives, who had unknowingly lived parallel lives with him, were among the most devastated. They could not believe that the gentle, caring man they had shared their homes with had secretly maintained two marriages while, at the same time, murdering multiple innocent women in cold blood. Under mounting pressure in the interrogation room, Mohan eventually broke down and confessed. He admitted to poisoning at least 32 women with cyanide between 2005 and 2009. When asked to name the victims, he coldly replied that he couldn't remember their names or faces. Investigators weren't surprised by his apathy. Mohan even struggled to recall the exact names of his two wives. To keep track of his crimes, Mohan had maintained a personal notebook meticulously documenting fake names and identities he had used, along with a list of women he had targeted, including, disturbingly, details about their menstrual cycles. What was once a private journal became a key piece of evidence in helping police unravel the full extent of his crimes. Still, prosecutors were unable to bring charges for all the murders Mohan claimed responsibility for. Although he confessed to killing 32 women, many of the bodies had been cremated and key evidence and identification documents had been destroyed. In the end, only 20 cases had enough verifiable evidence for formal prosecution. For these, prosecutors charged Mohan with a range of serious crimes, including murder, kidnapping, poisoning, identity fraud, and related offenses. The trial appeared to be headed toward a straightforward conviction, until Mohan suddenly reversed course just before appearing in court. He retracted his confession, insisted he had never killed anyone, and claimed the women had taken their own lives after he rejected their marriage proposals. He even blamed the victims, calling them emotionally weak. Rather than hiring a defense attorney, Mohan boldly declared he would represent himself. At the first court hearing, Mohan showed up looking polished. His hair was dyed black and neatly combed. He wore a pen clipped into his shirt pocket and carried himself like a legal professional, calm and composed. He bowed respectfully to the judge, took notes in his journal, and behaved more like a law student attending a lecture than a man facing multiple murder charges. Then came the first cross-examination, and Mohan stunned the courtroom. He pointed out a discrepancy in the case files. One document stated he had sold gold, while another claimed it had been pawned. He challenged the lead investigator to explain whether this was a clerical mistake or evidence tampering. He even suggested the statements weren't written by him, but fabricated by police. After reviewing the records, the judge confirmed it was a simple typographical error. Despite this brief moment of drama, it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. Physical items, consistent witness testimonies, and corroborated timelines left Mohan's defense increasingly flimsy and unconvincing. In December 2013, the court found him guilty and sentenced Mohan to death in 3 of the confirmed cases: Nitha, Lilavati, and Sanunda. He was also sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $500 for kidnapping, 8 years in prison and fined $500 for sexual assault, and 3 years in prison and fined $1,000 for poisoning. After delivering the verdict, the court moved to the judge's statement. As the gavel struck with finality, the judge expressed outrage, emphasizing that the defendant had not only taken innocent lives, but had also betrayed sacred values, trust, marriage, and love. Mohan had used the guise of marriage to commit murder, and for that level of cruelty, he deserved the harshest penalty allowed by law. But what followed that sentence sparked even greater public anger. In 2017, after Mohan filed an appeal, a higher court commuted his death sentence to life imprisonment. In later proceedings, he received additional death sentences and was handed another 15 years of life imprisonment. Then on June 26, 2020, following a new complaint filed by the family of victim Pushpa, Mohan was sentenced to yet another life term, bringing the total number of convictions to 20. This long string of overlapping rulings ignited a wave of fury across India. The public was no longer silent. People took to the streets, surrounded police stations, and protested not just against a serial killer, but against a system that had failed to protect women. Under growing pressure from the public and media, the government was forced to act and implement urgent reforms. As public outcry intensified, a number of major reforms began to take shape. Cyanide, once sold freely and without oversight, is now heavily regulated. Matchmaking centers are now required to verify the full identity of each member. When a woman goes missing, a mandatory 72-hour response protocol must now be triggered. In addition, every unidentified female body must be publicly reported in national media, allowing the community to help identify victims. On social media, police departments regularly warn citizens don't risk your life for a love story that hasn't been verified. Today, Mohan is over 60 years old and remains incarcerated in a prison in Karnataka state. For the families of his victims, it no longer matters whether he is executed or imprisoned for life. The only thing they care about is that this man, who used marriage to murder dozens of women, never walks free again. But to Mohan, the deaths of those women are little more than passing emotions. He admitted that he felt sad whenever someone died, but only for a couple of weeks, and then the feeling faded. Once a new woman came into the picture, the memories of the old ones were pushed aside like yesterday's news. Looking back on this case, one thing becomes clear. A murderer doesn't always carry a knife or hide in the shadows. Sometimes he wears a gentle smile, holds a bouquet of flowers, slips a ring onto your finger, and whispers promises of a beautiful future. But behind those promises lies a door, and once it opens, it may lead you into something far more dangerous and far more tragic than you ever imagined.